That is a very deceptive thing. Because
ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey drippers in. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the in the house tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey from Washington, D.C.
Quiet nights of quiet stars, quiet chords from a quiet nights.
They just have the honey drippers in these nights. And they just got back from Washington.
Quiet stars.
Something they want to say. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey drippers in the house tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, honey drippers in the house tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, honey drippers in the house tonight. Tonight. just got back from Washington, D.C. I think they got something they want to say.
And it smells good too.
Speechless.
Oh man! Oh man! Oh man!
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey drippers in the house tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey drippers in the house.
Thank you, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey drippers in the house
Thank you,
tonight.
guys. Well, niggas say yes,
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey drippers in the house tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the honey drippers in the house tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, on this note, thank you very much for being here.
Ladies and